And hello, Pittsburgh Steeler fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, Tony Defeo, and I thank you, as always, for joining me on this fine and very hot Saturday afternoon. I hope it's not as hot where you are as it is here in Pittsburgh, where it's really, really hot and really, really humid, and we could really, really use some rain. So, as always, before I get started, I'd like to encourage you to check out Behind Steel Curtains YouTube channel, where we have a plethora of podcasts each and every week. We have sometimes several a day. We have The Standard is the Standard, hosted by Dave Schofield, Michael Beck, Brian Anthony Davis is in there, sometimes Lance Williams. We have the Stat Geek with Dave Schofield and his brother, Big Bro Sco. We have, yeah, I said it, hosted by Lance Williams. Actually, last night's episode was hosted by Dave Schofield, and he had a special guest, a legend. Jeff Hartman came on and joined him and Brian for, I don't know if it was the whole show, but they were definitely on there in the beginning talking Steelers football. So that was a fun show. Of course, there's Steelers Q&A hosted by Brian Anthony Davis and yours truly every Monday at 5, followed by the Retro Show, where we talk about it's one of my new favorite things. We talk about all things Steelers from the past, which I love to talk about, because it's already happened. And, I don't have to worry about X's and O's and breaking down defenses and offenses and talking about who the next backup quarterback's going to be. So I love it, and I definitely love the last two shows that we've done. So tune in to that show right after the Q&A every Monday, and in the regular season, the Steelers Q&A is called the Steelers Hangover, where we discuss the latest Steelers game, usually the day after the latest Steelers game. And then also, of course, check out Behind the Steel Curtain, where we bring you 10 articles each and every day, breaking news. We have film breakdown. We have salary cap talk. We have commentary. We have just about everything you need. As we like to say, it's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. So please check that out. And what's up, everybody? In the live chat, there's Jared Devil, Justin Conway, which I don't know if I recognize that name, but if it's a new one, hey, thanks for joining me. Donald Nolan, the one and only Ezra, Just Me, George Teston, Snowman, the legendary Snowman. This is Rod Young. So thank you all for joining me. And as always, I have a few things I'd like to talk about. They're probably not going to be very popular things. I'm just going to warn you. Not going to be very popular, I don't think, but at least a couple of them aren't going to be very popular. I think I'm going to end on a high note. At least I hope so. But the first couple of topics, maybe not so popular. But the first thing I want to talk about and there's Alex Flores, Biggie Bronco. How you doing, guys? Anyway, thanks for joining me. The first thing I want to talk about, as the title suggests, is the hypothetical question of what would you do if the Steelers had to change their name. I wrote about this. I wrote it on Monday. It just came to me, and I wrote it, and I thought that is, I was so proud of myself for writing it. It felt like such an uplifting article, an uplifting topic. In my opinion, if the Steelers had to change their name, I really wouldn't care. And obviously, I got the idea because it was announced early last week that the Redskins were going to change their name after years of public pressure from people, that the name Redskins was insensitive, that they should change their name. They finally decided to do it. And I thought, and I saw social media, people were lashing out, oh, I'm done with you, and all this, the typical things people say. And I thought, if the Steelers had to change their name, and not because they were forced to do it or because it was an offensive name, why would the name Steelers be offensive, right? There's no way that anybody could ever find that offensive. It's just ridiculous. But, I kind of indirectly got this idea a few weeks ago when I was watching YouTube, and I was watching the day that Big Ben threw six touchdown passes against the Colts. Remember, he did that back-to-back weeks in 2014, first against the Colts and then against the Ravens the following week. Well, the game against the Colts, Andrew Luck, that game, the Steelers were wearing their, in my opinion, god-awful Bumblebee uniforms, right? And I was like, it was like a 20-minute clip or a 15-minute clip, with highlights. And I was like 10 minutes into it, and it never even dawned on me that they were wearing these uniforms, right? It never even occurred to me, and I thought, in years past when they have worn their throwbacks, whether it's the Bumblebee or the old uniforms that they used to wear in the 2000s, where they would the gold helmets and the white pants. You just never notice. Like, you talk about it before the week leading up to the game, or the gold or the color rush uniforms, the new thing that they do once a year now. It's in the news throughout the week before the game, leading up to the game, and people comment on it. I can't believe they're going to wear these uniforms and blah blah blah. But when you're watching the game, you're so engrossed in the action. You're so into the action, you don't even notice the uniforms. At least I don't. I don't notice the uniforms. So that kind of got me. I indirectly thought it back to that, and that kind of reinforced this idea of if the Steelers had to change their name, I don't think it would matter. I really don't. And I just couldn't believe the response. I mean, I guess I kind of get it because I'm used to this after 10 years. A lot of people just read the headlines. A lot of people, they just, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because I'm left-handed, like what's going on up here sometimes doesn't translate well onto the in the text. I don't know. But, people just, they took it and they were just like so offended by it. Like, oh, how could you, I got these nasty emails from people, like really nasty. And by the way, if you want to send me nasty emails, especially about politics, which is what this was not about politics, right? This had nothing to do with politics or anything like that. It was just a hypothetical. And people just sent me these bizarre emails. If you're going to do that, I'm either going to ignore those emails or just write something back very rude. I'm just letting you know, because there's no reason to write the nasty things that you get, especially about this topic. It wasn't really a big deal. I thought it was actually a really positive article. So I was kind of taken aback by the response. But I guess my whole point is it's really not about the name. It's about what the name represents, what the organization represents. And the Steelers have, especially over the last 50 years or so, when they've established themselves as a championship organization that tries to do things the right way and always tries to do things in a way that will lead to winning and lead to championships, and such a great presence in the community, in the Pittsburgh community. If they changed their name, Pittsburgh Gladiators, Warriors, whatever they would change it to, Ironheads, Power, whatever, would it really matter? I don't think it would. I really just don't think it would matter. And I realize it would matter to a lot of people, especially a lot of out of market fans, people that have never been to Pittsburgh because they identify with the brand and that's it. But I think as far as like the community, the Pittsburgh community, like the region, it might take some getting used to, right? It might take some getting used to, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't. I don't think it would drive that many people away. I don't think it would. And when I look around, look at the Raiders. Oakland, right? The city of Oakland. The Raiders have kind of been jerking those people around for years, right? They moved to LA in the early 80s because the city wouldn't build them a new stadium. I guess that's why they moved. And then they moved back, and then now they moved back. Now they moved again. Now they're in Las Vegas, right? And meanwhile, the Oakland fans have always been loyal, or they were always loyal to the Raiders for years. They were just through thick and thin. In the first 30 years or so of that franchise's existence, there was a lot of winning. There were Super Bowls, division titles. They were always in the playoffs. They were the silver and black. The autumn win is the Raider, right? It was just some of the greatest players who ever played in the NFL played for the Raiders during that time. The last 20 years that they were in Oakland, not so great, right? After their last Super Bowl appearance against the Buccaneers, just wasn't it was a pretty large fall, a pretty big fall from grace. Yet the fans stuck with them, right? As a Steeler fan, I'm sure you notice too, if you go on YouTube and look at any highlights of the many times that the Steelers were upset in Oakland over the last 15 years or so, or at Heinz Field, they got upset by them once or twice. And the fans were just reveling in that, so there's a base there. So if there might be a lot of Oakland fans that are still going to be loyal to the Raiders, that even though they're in Las Vegas, but if that city got a new team, whether it was a team that relocated to Oakland, like the Chargers or somebody, or just got an expansion team, their loyalties would go right to that team. I almost guarantee it, because they're passionate about football. They love football in that region. Look at when the Colts left Baltimore in 1984, and there was a time when War Memorial Stadium was the place to be for in the NFL. I mean, it was just like they described that place in the 50s. It was like a college atmosphere, you know. You couldn't find a more passionate, loyal fan base, and they left, and then obviously the Ravens eventually moved, or the Browns moved there in 1996 and became the Ravens, and they adopted them, and now they're just as passionate as ever. Some might say, if you're a Steelers fan, you might think they're obnoxious and jerks. That's because they're in the AFC North, so you have no choice but to think of them that way. But they adopted that team. The Oilers had a huge following, and Love You Blue, right? Bum Phillips, that whole era, and then Warren Moon, Jerry Glanville, that era. Passionate fans, the House of Pain. That's what the Astrodome was called in the late '80s and early '90s. And they left because I guess they wouldn't build them a new stadium or something. Bud Adams relocated the team to Tennessee, renamed them the Titans, and then eventually the Texans. The Texans came there as an expansion team in 2002. And they haven't had the success yet that the Oilers had. Although the Oilers never really made it to a Super Bowl, but they did have a lot of great years. So that was a tough act to follow, and the Texans haven't quite reached that level as far as success, but they've been pretty successful, and the fans have adopted them, and even the Browns, Cleveland. When the Browns, people think, okay, the city of Cleveland got the Browns franchise back, but they, just because they're named the Browns and they have the same color scheme and everything, it's still a completely different franchise, and basically I'm sure, guys like Jim Brown and Ozzie Newsome and all the great Autograms, I guess, passed away, but all the greats that are associated with the Browns, their association is with the franchise in Baltimore. The Browns is a completely new franchise, and yet that city has adopted it, and it's been 20 years of mostly misery for that franchise, and yet the city has found a way to love it. So if all of these things can happen, if a city that was passionate about a team that left, like the Oilers, like the Colts, like the Browns, like the Raiders, I guess the Raiders is a bad example because Oakland doesn't have a team, but as I explained, if that city does get a new team, I guarantee you they'll accept it. So if a city can accept a new team, then Pittsburgh can just accept the name change, right? I think that's safe to say, right? And that's all. That's the only point I was trying to make. I wasn't trying to be political. I might be in a second with this next topic, but I wasn't trying to be political. I wasn't trying to say the name was offensive. I wasn't trying to troll or click or I wasn't writing clickbait material. All these things that people like to say. I was just trying to think, and that's what usually when I write about something, I do so because I find it interesting, right? I find it. When I find something interesting, I try to be funny or informative or insightful, and that's my only goal. Not to troll. Well, sometimes it's a troll, like when I do fake mock drafts on April Fools. But other than that, I'm really not trying to troll people. I'm just trying to make a point and hopefully be informative. So that was my only reasoning for writing that article. Is I thought it would be, if the Steelers had to change their name, would I care? And the verdict is no, I wouldn't. I personally probably would not care. I would continue to follow the team. I would continue to love the team. It would still be the same team that won 6 Super Bowls. It would still be the same team, with the same owners. I would assume it would still be the same. It would still be playing in Heinz Field, right? It would still come on at 1:00 every Sunday afternoon or Monday night at 8:30 or whatever. It would still, it would still be the same franchise. It would just have a different name, and hopefully I wouldn't drive too many people away, but if it did, it did, but it wouldn't drive me away. And I'm assuming it wouldn't drive most of the region away, because it's at the end of the day, it would still be Pittsburgh's football team, Pittsburgh's NFL franchise. And that's really the most important part is it's, you have a team to root for in your city. And if you love football, you're going to find a way to love that team. It's just how it is. So that's all I was trying to say. And, to me, it's one of my most favorite articles I've written in a while. So if you haven't checked it out, go ahead and check it out, and see what you think. But I wasn't trying to get a rise out of anybody. I wasn't trying to be a troll. I was just pointing out something I thought was interesting, because because the people in Washington, they have whether they look at it politically or not, whether they, no matter how they look at it, they have an interesting dilemma. They're going to have a new team name. It's going to be the same franchise. I don't know if it's going to be the same color scheme or the same symbol or the same logo, but it's going to be the same team with a different name. So either they're going to embrace it or they're going to walk away from it. And I get the feeling that the vast majority of fans of, I guess, what it's called, the Washington Football Club, the vast majority of people who have been following that team for years are still going to follow that team. They're still going to be loyal to that team. They're still going to love that team. They're still going to want it to win, because at the end of the day, that team represents them and their city. And even if you're an out-of-market fan of that team, if you still identify closely with that team, you're still gonna be loyal to it, in my opinion. A name change, it's not unprecedented. Teams have changed their names in the past, right? It's just sometimes it happens. The Steelers used to be the Pirates because Art Rooney was a big baseball fan. The late Art Rooney. He was a big baseball fan. He named them the Pirates in 1933. They were that, I guess, through the late 40s maybe, and then they changed the name to the Steelers, right? Life went on. And back then, you could do things like that without there being a big uproar over it, because social media didn't exist and everybody didn't have a voice like they do now, where everybody can share their opinion instantaneously and tell you how outraged they are, So it happened before, it's probably going to happen again throughout history. Teams are going to change their name for whatever reason. Maybe they think it's stale. Maybe they just want a makeover, right? And they decide to change their name. It's going to happen again, so life is going to go on. And I think life would go on in Pittsburgh and for most of the Steeler fans if the team became something else, right? So that's all I want to say about that. And the next topic I have is a very controversial topic, and one that caught my eye this past week. I mean, it's always been a fascinating topic to me, and that's the whole issue with kneeling for the anthem. And we know it's going to be a big thing again this year, because they've already kind of told us, the NFL has already told us that they're going to be okay with kneeling. They're not going to try to discourage it. And what I'm seeing now, and I saw this, it first caught my eye on Tuesday, but I've seen it every day since, because I've looked for it. The Steelers, on their official Facebook page, they posted a picture of David DeCastro for some reason. I don't know if it was 66 days till the start of the season, which it couldn't have been, because I think we're already closer than 66 days to the presumptive start of the regular season. But they posted a picture of David DeCastro, and the very first person that commented said, "If they kneel, I'm not watching," something like that, right? They better not kneel this year, or they're going to lose me as a fan. And what that did is it got like 5 million responses from people, and it was like a big old crap show, right? And I've been paying attention to this on Facebook and on Twitter, and everything, any NFL related, or just about every NFL related article or Steelers related article, there's somebody on there or somebody comes on and says something like that. If they kneel, I'm done, And what it does, it just wrecks the comment section. It wrecks the Twitter thread. It totally just, because it's always the same thing, right? It's the same responses, the same things as 2017, right? If they don't kneel, if they kneel, I'm not watching. Well, and then somebody else responds with the "Bye Felicia" meme, and then there's somebody that posts the NSYNC "Bye Bye Bye" gif, right? And then somebody comes on and says, "Well, these are a bunch of millionaire crybabies, and if they have it so bad, they should just quit playing or leave the country or whatever." And then somebody else says, "A veteran said it was okay. He told Colin Kaepernick to kneel." And somebody else says, "Well, that veteran doesn't speak for me." And then an actual veteran comes on and says, "Well, you don't speak for all the veterans, or we agree with their right to kneel. We fought for it." So it's the same stuff being said now that was said 3 years ago. So my advice to you is, if you're waiting for them to kneel, you might as well, in order to watch or don't watch, you might as well just decide not to watch right now, because they're going to kneel. It kind of reminds me of the I get a vision of these fans waiting for to see if a player kneels. It's like, if you remember the Key and Peele skit on the Key and Peele show many years ago. They were making fun of twerking, essentially, football celebrations, and the Hingle McCringleberry, the it was okay for 2 pelvic thrusts were okay, but 3, it was a penalty. And Jordan Peele, as a referee, he was watching McCringleberry's his crotch, right? He was watching after he did 2 thrusts, waiting for him to do a third. And if he did a third, penalty. And that's how I kind of envision fans right now. Like, they're just going to be sitting there in September in their living rooms in September, waiting for a player to kneel, and then that's it, I'm done, and then shut the TV off. Excuse me while I take a drink, because I'm getting all worked up. This is your 20-minute drink break, brought to you by Tony Defeo and Steelers Brunch with Tony. All-Star game, 3 River Stadium, great year. Anyway, I digress. Where was I? I gotta check my notes after that drink. Oh yeah, I guess my point with that is, if you want to walk away from the NFL for players kneeling, I get it, right? I get it. We talked about it before. Some people are just always going to be offended by it, and they're going to take it the wrong way, and they're just not going to like it. So if you want to walk away, walk away. I get it. But what I don't want to see, which I know I can't prevent, is a whole season of people wrecking the comment sections of every Steelers article, every NFL article that's posted. It's going to be wrecked with these fights, because it sounds exactly the same way that it did 3 years ago. It's like, remember after the 2018 season when the Steelers had the audacity to miss the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, and every Steelers related article, somebody said hashtag fire Tomlin, and it just started a big dumpster fire of comments, right? And just every article was wrecked by this. So I have a feeling that's how it's going to be again. So if you want to not watch, don't watch. But if you're going to do that, it's not going to. I don't think it's, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter, because I think when people say they're not watching, and then they continue to come into the comment sections and say the same things over and over again, what they're really doing is they're trying to draw attention to themselves, going, like, yoo-hoo NFL, I'm not watching. Just so you know, I'm still not watching. It's like they're actively not watching, right? And I don't know if they think that this is going to make a difference, but it really isn't, because it didn't matter in 2017. Ultimately, it didn't matter. People thought they were trying to say it was going to matter. They were saying, oh, you watch, this is going to bring the league down. And it didn't. So here we are 3 years later, and people are saying the same thing. You watch, it's going to bring the whole league down. Because I think people, when they feel a certain way, they just assume that the vast majority of people feel the exact same way that they do. And I have a bad habit of doing that too. I just assume that everybody feels the same way I do about something. And, forget it, because like, there are people that say 90% of people that attend games, they're against kneeling. Really, 90%? Like, we can't, in this country, we can't get a consensus on anything. I mean, no matter what a poll, like you put up a poll about anything, the Munsters or the Addams family, 50-50, right? Pineapple pizza or a pile of dog poo, 50-50. I'd rather have the dog poo than pizza with pineapples on it. Like, we can't agree on anything. So to say that 90% of the people are against kneeling, it's just not true. So what's going to happen is you're gonna make all this fuss like you did 3 years ago, and you're gonna hope that it makes a difference, and it really isn't. Because number one, if you weren't against kneeling in 2017, why would you suddenly be against it in 2020, right? What would change? What has changed for you in 3 years? And number two, even if more people stop watching this year, as weird as this is to say, more people are going to be watching, because I'm guessing that there aren't going to be very many people allowed in stadiums, if any people allowed in stadiums this year. So all the people that normally would be at the stadium are going to be watching on TV, right? And even if people decide not to watch, like if more people decide not to watch this year than in 2017, that many more people are going to be watching, because they're going to be stuck at home. And you also have to remember that probably a lot of sports bars are going to be closed. So there's going to be more people at home watching And I guarantee you that NFL is going to get the highest ratings that it ever did this year, or or at least at the very least, their ratings are going to be healthy. It's not going to take the league down. It's just not. You know. I think what what what's going to happen ultimately is 20, 30 years from now, some kid's gonna look at this, like see a picture of Colin Kaepernick or some NFL player kneeling in their history book or whatever history class looks like in 30 years. Maybe it'll just be online, and they're going to go, that was a crazy time in American society back in the late teens and the early 20s. Wow. And then they're going to go about their business, and they're probably going to go home that weekend and watch football, right? And then, people my age now are going to be really old, 75, 80, and they're going to, they're going to say to these kids, I stopped watching 30 years ago when those players started kneeling, and I haven't watched since. And these kids are going to go, okay, that's nice, Grandpa. Excuse me while I finish drafting my fantasy football team. Yeah, they're just not going to care. It's like me when I was a kid, and I watched in my history class, we learned about the two African American athletes in the '68 Olympics who stood with their fists in the air as a protest, right? That was I'm sure at that time it was considered a big deal. I know it was considered a big deal, but life went on, life moved on, and when I saw it, I was like, oh, that was interesting, and it didn't stop me from watching the Olympics, so. I think people when people are saying these things and they're boycotting and I think they're trying to actively make things happen. Because I remember reading message boards that were connected, that were linked to articles about this stuff back in 2017, and there were people on there going, "Oh, the ratings are down 1%. We're doing a good job. We got to do better. We got to get more people to stop watching." And like they were actively trying to, they were actively not watching. Like they were trying to make it cause a result by not watching the NFL. And it's like I used to manage a grocery store, right? And occasionally somebody would come in and say and there'd be a dispute with one of the customers, and they would say, "I'm never shopping here again." And 9 times out of 10, it was an unreasonable thing. Like we had. One time, this middle-aged couple called me and complained because the 16-year-old cashier didn't smile and say thank you when they were checking out, right? And she was like, "Oh, I said thank you to him, but really he should have been saying thank you to me." Obviously, they didn't have very many problems in their lives if they were that worried about a 16-year-old cashier who probably had to be reminded every day to take a shower. If they thought that this kid was refined enough to know to say thank you and smile and all this other stuff, they were that worried about it, they had to call the store afterwards and say they were never gonna shop there again. This other guy came in one time and he was mad because he looked over at our magazine stand and we were selling People magazine and what else? People and In Touch and Us Weekly, and there were scantily clad women on it. Like whoever at the time, I don't know. Like, what if our kid sees that? And it's really not that big. It's not a Playboy, right? It's really not that big of a deal. It's not going to ruin your shopping experience. And this other woman said that she morally objected to debit sales, whatever the heck that even meant. I'm still trying to figure that out. Like 17 years later, how can you morally object to debit transactions? But she said she did and would never shop at our store again. So, there are some things that, if you're an owner or a store manager, you have to worry about, like if you sell sour milk or bad meat, or if you have roaches running around. But there are other things that, look, you just have to, if people say they don't want to shop there anymore, you just have to all right, sorry you feel that way, but we're just going to keep doing what we do. Right. And I think when it comes to kneeling in the NFL, that's like the being mad at people, having People magazine on your rack. That's the equivalent. It'll only ruin your shopping experience if you allow it to. So, at the end of the day, the NFL is going to be fine. And really, you're only hurting yourself, and you might think you're hurting the NFL. Maybe short term, you'll hurt it a little bit. Their ratings might go down like they did in 2017. But I doubt it this year, for the reasons that I just explained. There's going to be more people at home than ever before. By my estimation, there'll be a million more people at home who otherwise would have been at stadiums watching every Sunday. So it's not going to really affect the ratings. It's like we always think, I think every era, every generation thinks it's the most important one, but it's like the Kansas song, all we are is just dust in the wind at the end of the day. It's just, we're not as important as we think we are. So life will go on whether we watch the NFL or not. And if you decide not to watch, that's fine. But again, it's a heck of a hobby to try to give up, being a diehard sports fan, because if you're a, you can replace golf with tennis. You can replace running with spinning. You can replace Pilates with yoga. But when it comes to the hobby of being a diehard sports fan and following a team, and it doesn't matter what team it is, doesn't matter what sport it is, doesn't matter what level it is. If you're a diehard fan, you get it, right? It's like what Ric Flair said about wrestling fans. If you're a fan, no explanation is necessary. If you're not a fan, no explanation will do. So to try to fill that void of you might say, well, the Steelers, I love America more than I love the Steelers. Okay, fine. Okay, but it's still a hobby that you've enjoyed your whole life, and now you're just going to give it up, and it's going to be hard to replace. So I would seriously think about that if I were you. That's just my opinion, my advice. You can tell me to go to heck if you want, which I'm sure somebody will. But and that brings me to my next point, which is forgiveness of sports franchises. It's like I've noticed a lot, especially the last 10 years or so, is fans are so quick to want to just give up on teams for whatever reason, or give up on a league or a sport, right? I was talking to a guy on Twitter a couple weeks ago. Who said he hasn't followed the Steelers since the Big Ben allegations, and they were serious allegations, but is that at the end of the day, is that enough to forever stop following the football team? A good friend of mine told me a couple of years ago that he stopped watching the Steelers after they signed Mike Vick. I mean, he was here for 1 year. We all know what he did. He committed some horrible, heinous things. But I mean, he was here for 1 year. He was a backup. He played in a few games, and that was enough. And he's, said, I don't watch anymore. Now, granted, he's a bigger Penguins fan than he is a Steelers fan. So, maybe he fills a void that way. But what if something happens with the Penguins? Is he going to give up on them? I know people who don't watch baseball anymore, who stopped watching in 1994 after the players' strike. It wiped out the entire second half of that season or the last couple of months, and then they canceled the World Series, and people haven't forgiven them for that. Baseball, 26 years ago. Sports is, you're always going to have work stoppages. It's just when you have unions, you're going to have work stoppages. So to just totally give up on a certain sport because they decided to go on strike or have a lockout, I mean, I don't get that, So, I mean, at a certain point, you just have to recognize that, look, things happen. These are human beings. There's thousands of them that you have to, and you shouldn't let other people, control how you feel, right? If a guy decides to kneel, or if a guy decides to hold out, or if a sport shuts down for a work, you shouldn't let it affect your enjoyment forever. You just shouldn't, because there's certain things that are out of your control. It's like the old saying, you can't control what happens. You could control how you act, how you react to it, right? And if you decide you want to react by not watching, okay, but life's going to go on, So that's how I feel about that stuff, And before I get on to my final topic, I saw that we had a $5 super chat question. I don't want to forget about that, because it's a big deal when somebody donates $5 to the cause. Let's see here. Here's one from this is from George Teston. I wonder what would happen if the announcer said, "Please kneel for the national anthem." I don't think the announcer would say that. I think my whole point is you can choose to ignore it and not let it affect your football viewing experience, because it really, unless you want it to, it's not going to affect the product. It's not like, a store selling sour milk. It's not like a store selling bad meat or a store having cockroaches everywhere. It's not what kneeling is. It's not going to affect your viewing pleasure unless you allow it to, And no announcer would say, "Please kneel for the anthem." They're just, and as far as like, there's 1,700 NFL players, and how many of them kneel? Like at one time, would it be like a couple hundred? a couple dozen. Is that enough to ruin it for you? If it is, well, okay, it is. But life's going to go on. The NFL is going to go on. And as I keep saying, you're only hurting yourself at the end. So those are the two controversial topics I wanted to start with. And if you're still with me, I have an uplifting one I want to talk about, and that's basically it has to do with the retro show, the one the first 2 or 3 episodes we've done, and I've really enjoyed the last 2, discussing the naming the top Steelers of all time in the modern era, who never made it to a Pro Bowl, but were pretty darn good players nonetheless. And I really had a great time discussing that with Brian on the last 2 episodes, because I've always had a soft spot in my heart for players that, especially players that played when I was a kid in the 80s, because, as I said on Monday, you're almost better off if you're a player who was a major contributor prior to 1970, whether it was like Ernie Stotner, John Henry Johnson, the great running back, the veteran running back they had in the 60s. It was almost better to be a great player back then. But once the Super Bowls started happening, it seems like that's how we define every player in every era. Did they win a Super Bowl or didn't they? If they didn't, well, okay, they were nice players, but people tend to forget about them, And when I like about shows like the last couple of Mondays, the retro shows, is, you honored some of the guys that they weren't great players, but they were really good players. And had they come along in a different era, like the 90s or the 2000s or the 70s, when the Steelers were either winning Super Bowls or contending for them, strongly contending for them, I think they would have been remembered more fondly, like a Keith Willis. Here's a guy who was an undrafted free agent in 1982 out of Northeastern. He played here for a decade. Never made a Pro Bowl, but he had 59 sacks, including seasons 14 and 12. Yet he never made it to a Pro Bowl. Had the Steelers been better or more relevant in the 80s, he probably would have been more of a household name. And, I said that I mentioned something about the Steelers returning to relevance in the 90s. And somebody said they weren't relevant in the 80s, and not really. No, they weren't. Not like they were in the 70s, not like they were in the 90s, not like they were in the 2000s. I mean, they were not one of the premier teams in the league in the 80s. They just weren't. I mean, yeah, they made it to an AFC championship game. They made the playoffs a few times. But compared to what they did in the 70s, compared to what the atmosphere was in the 90s with Cowher, they weren't a relevant team. I mean, you're talking about like the 49ers, the Redskins, the Washington club. The Raiders were still good in the 80s. The Broncos, the Browns were really good in the 80s, believe it or not. The Bengals made it to the Super Bowl a couple of times. The Giants, the Bears. There are a lot of really good, relevant championship teams in the 80s, and the Steelers weren't one of them. So for guys that played in that era, again, like a Keith Willis or a Brian Hinkle or Dwayne Woodruff, who was a really great veteran cornerback who started many games for them, had 30-some interceptions, right? These guys are largely forgotten because they played in an era where the team just didn't win a lot, And in the 80s, the Steelers, they weren't, again, they had a lot of mediocre seasons. They won double digits. They had double-digit win seasons once, 1983. From 1980 through Chuck Noll's last season, 1991, they had one double-digit win season, and that was in 83. And you're talking about seasons of 8-8, 9-7, 7-9, 6-10, 5-11. They just weren't a relevant team. So, like a guy like Louis Lips, who did make a Pro Bowl, a couple Pro Bowls, and he was an All-Pro a couple times. He was one of the stars of his day. But, our Steelers fans get to remember him as fondly as, for example, Santonio Holmes, who never made a Pro Bowl here. But, every time you look back at the Super Bowl 43 run, you're going to see what he did against the Ravens to win the division, that, tiptoe catch, just breaking the plane, right, in Baltimore. You're going to see that punt return against the Chargers in the divisional round that basically jump-started the Steelers' run to the Super Bowl. You're going to see what he did against the Ravens in the championship game, that 63-yard catch and run. And, of course, the Super Bowl, where he was the MVP, 130-some yards, I think it was. And, of course, arguably the greatest big-time catch in the history of the NFL, when he caught that catch against the Cardinals in the corner of the end zone. You're going to remember that. Louis Lips, you're probably not going to remember all that he's not going to be, he's not going to be remembered as fondly. Guys like Brett Kiesel or Chris Hoke, guys like that are always going to be. There's always going to be a special place in Steeler Nation for those guys because they were on Super Bowl teams, and of course, Brett Kiesel was a great personality with the beard, and he's just a great personality, and he was a good player, and so was Chris Hoke, but they weren't on the same level as they weren't as impactful as a Cardinal Lake, who was a Pro Bowler, and I believe he was an All-Pro in his day, but he just played in an era where the Steelers didn't win a Super Bowl. They were really good. They made it to a Super Bowl, and he was a big factor in them making that Super Bowl when he converted from safety to cornerback to take over for Rod Woodson when he suffered the ACL in week 1 of that 95 season. But, people aren't going to remember Cardinal Lake like they do with Ike Taylor. And even though Cardinal Lake was probably a better player than Ike Taylor, right? But they're not going to remember him, like they remember Ryan Clark. Cardinal Lake was probably a better player than Ryan Clark. He was probably a better player than Chris Hope, but they're not going to remember him because he didn't win a Super Bowl. And that's why I like honoring those players. And that's why I like the Hall of Honor at the Steelers started a few years ago. I like that concept because it allows guys like Cardinal Lake and Keith Willis and Brian Hinkle and so many others who may have been forgotten, but now fans can look up or wherever these names are displayed and they say, oh yeah, Cardinal Lake, Dwayne Woodruff, those are great players. If they do make it into the Hall of Honor, I'm not sure if they have. I'm pretty sure Cardinal Lake will because he was a really good player for them. Even Rod Woodson, who's an all-time great, right? He's an all-time great, not just an all-time great Steeler, but an all-time great NFL player. I don't think he gets the recognition he deserves in Pittsburgh because he didn't win a Super Bowl. And the one year that they made it, he barely was a participant. He missed all but the game in week 1, and he played in the Super Bowl as a slot corner, a nickel corner. He didn't really start. He had a torn ACL. What are you going to do? But and I remember a number of years ago that the night that they retired Mean Joe's number 75, I wrote an article saying maybe the Steelers should retire Rod Woodson's number 26 as a sort of to pay homage to pay respect to those 90s teams that had a great run, had a lot of great players, but they never got over the hump, and people may forget about how great that era was in Steelers history. And people are like, oh, and this goes back to my point about, you're dealing with human beings and times change. You might feel one way a certain time, and 5-6 years later, you might feel differently. And like people were like, oh, it's going to be Le'Veon Bell's number that gets his number 26 is going to be retired. You just watch because people loved Le'Veon Bell back in 2014. He was like the toast of the town. He was their most valuable player. And of course, now he's public enemy number 1 because he of all the holdouts and everything and the rap careers and the suspensions. And now people hate Le'Veon Bell. But back in 2014, the mere suggestion that the Steelers retire Rod Woodson's number 26, like it was offensive to people, So even Rod Woodson, as great as he is, arguably the greatest cornerback in the history of the franchise, people don't remember him like they remember Mel Blount because he never won a Super Bowl. So I just think, I'm looking for, like the retro show is not always going to be about that. It's going to be about Super Bowl years and sometimes in various games throughout history. But I just enjoyed the last 2 episodes. I really, Brian came up with a really great concept, and I really just enjoyed it. And I love, like talking about guys like Frank Pollard and John Jackson and a lot of guys that I really loved growing up who you just kind of forget about because they didn't win championships, So those are all the 3 topics I wanted to discuss today. And I saw another $5 super chat question, and I think it was from Snowman, our resident Robin Masters. So I'm going to throw that up here. Have you heard anything about the Steelers signing their draft picks? As of yesterday, they hadn't done it yet, which, it's kind of puzzling because here we are, about 10 days away from the start of training camp, presumably, and they haven't signed their draft picks. It's kind of weird, but these players are all slotted. So I don't know what the holdup is. Honestly, it shouldn't be that hard to come to an agreement with these guys. But I'm no expert on that kind of stuff. But being said, it's hard for a player to have much leverage now, a draft pick to have much leverage in 2020 with the way they slot draft picks and what they're paid based on where they're drafted in each round and based on what round they're drafted in, I find it kind of weird that they haven't signed anybody yet, especially since they didn't even have a first round pick. I mean, Chase Claypool was a second round pick and he was a late second round pick, right? Like 18th or something. So, it shouldn't be that hard to get these guys signed, but I mean, it could just be a formality. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're waiting to see if there is going to be a training camp before they, decide to be aggressive and sign all these guys, But obviously they're going to have to sign them in order for them to participate in training camp, because I've never heard of an instance where a player, I mean, OTAs are different, but a player doesn't participate in training camp if he's not under contract. So they obviously have to get it done fairly quickly. So thank you for that $5, Snowman, as always. Let's see what else we have here. Here's one from Donna Nolan. Okay, let's see what he has to say. It's about the anthem. I am ex-military. When I'm at a ball game and I hear, the anthem is not the words that matter to me. It's the point behind the song. I know the words and wasn't trying to offend anyone. Okay, I'm not sure what that was all about. I guess it was another one of those live chat discussions that I'm butting it on. So sorry about that. And here's one from Ezra, a comment, and I agree with this, or at least I like it anyway. Woodson is top 3 cornerback in NFL history. Yeah, I mean, I'm biased because I watched the guy growing up. I was a teenager in the late 80s. So, I mean, a player like Rod Woodson, the entire 1980s, I didn't get to watch a guy that special play for the Steelers because they drafted so poorly in the mid to late 70s, and even in the early 80s, they really didn't find many impactful players. So to grab a guy like Rod Woodson, who I literally watched him take over games all by himself. Sack the quarterback, pick up the ball, taking him for a touchdown, return a punt for a touchdown, return a kickoff for a touchdown. And this guy was not just a great cornerback; he was just a great, like my late grandfather would say, he was just a ball player. He was just a great ball player. You know how you like to say that Deion Sanders didn't like to tackle? Well, yeah, he didn't like to tackle. Rod Woodson liked to do it all. He could do it all. He could tackle. He could, people talk about Gary Anderson's 50-yard field goal. People forget that Rod Woodson set that up by just destroying the Oilers linebacker, or I'm sorry, the Oilers running back. I think it was Lorenzo White. Just hit him like a missile, knocked the ball loose, and they recovered it like the 35-yard line. The offense didn't even move the ball more than a couple of yards after they got it back in overtime. He basically set up that field goal, Rod Woodson. So he was just a great all-around player. I mean, here's a guy that by his 8th season, 1994, he was already named to the NFL's 75th anniversary team. That's hard to do when you're an active player, So he was really special. I'm not, it's debatable whether he's better than Mel Blount or all these guys. Again, it's easy to call because they changed the game because of Mel Blount. I mean, the Mel Blount rule exists because of Mel Blount. So, but at the same time, I mean, when you participate in a Super Bowl era like that, like Mel Blount did, it's easy to get considered to be considered a better player than somebody who played in a non-Super Bowl era, But you mean to tell me if Rod Woodson played for those teams, he wouldn't have been equally as dominant? He probably would have been. Obviously, his resume shows that he would have been. So, again, I'm not trying to take away anything from Mel Blount or any of those guys, but, it's like if Rod Woodson won a couple of Super Bowls when he was here, I think we would remember him more fondly than we do now. I think there is a lot of love for Rod Woodson, don't get me wrong, but I don't think we look at him and cherish him like we do a Mel Blount or a Jack Lambert or a Mean Joe Green, or a Franco, because he didn't win a Super Bowl. But meanwhile, this guy was every bit the player that those guys were, So let's see what else we have here. Let's see. Here's one from Dallas Quinley. He's another regular. Thank you for joining us, Dallas. It's just a comment. When we hear the name Steeler, it is implied that we are talking about a team with pride and a team who plays with heart. Yeah, but I mean, it would still be the same. I get you. It's a great brand. It's a great name. It's one of the best names in sports as far as I'm concerned. I don't really. A lot of people might not know what it means, but we know what it means, right? If you're a Green Bay Packers fan, You know what that means. A lot of people might not know. Oh, what the heck's a Packer? But if you're a Packers fan, you know. Oh, you hear that name, and it's all you hear is pride and winning and championships, title town, right? So it's a great, but I think it would be the same thing if they had to change, if they changed your name for whatever reason. If it would still be, we would still have pride in that team because it would be the same franchise and it would have the same goals and it would have the same philosophies and it would be all about winning, all about competing, all about finding the best coaches, the best players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see. Here we go. Here's what else we have here. Yeah, here's Snowman. A lot of people hold that against Woodson. They play for the Ravens at the end of his career, but I think it's kind of Woodson won a championship with the Ratbirds. I think people have used that against Woodson because he bounced around after he left here. He left here after the '96 season. He played with the Raiders. He went to the Super Bowl with them. He played with the 49ers. I think, and then of course the Ravens. And I think that's it. After he left here, there might have been another team thrown in there. I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and look. But people say, well, he played with the Ravens, so I'm not saying Snowman's saying this, but a lot of people have used that against him over the years. That he went to their top rival. But that's revisionist history because back in 2000, 2001, the Ravens weren't the Steelers' top rival. They didn't become that until the late 2000s, in my opinion, when all the playoff game clashes started, all the regular season clashes started, all those 3-point games started. So I don't think they were quite Steelers rivals back then. But even then, I mean, guys got to make a living, right? And he did win a championship, so but he didn't win it here, so people aren't gonna. But he did say back in 2007 that he'll always be a Steeler at heart. So I took great pride in that as a big Rod Woodson fan. But let's see. Here's another one from Ezra. When it comes to certain positions, the Pittsburgh Steelers have all-time greats at cornerback, safety, linebacker, quarterback, receiver. Yeah. Well, I mean, they have a lot of, especially linebacker. I mean, I was amazed last week when I was going over trying to find linebackers that didn't make the Pro Bowl. It was hard. I mean, like guys like Hardy Nickerson and after he left here, and even David Little. Oh, he didn't make a Pro Bowl, but I forgot that he did back when I was in high school. It was actually a big deal at the time. His teammates loved him so much that when he made it, it was a big celebration. It's hard to find. That's why when I was doing research, along with Brian to try to find look up all these great defensive players over the years. It was hard to find guys who didn't make Pro Bowls. I mean, that's how many great defenders that they've had over the last 50 years or so. So. Ryan O'Toole, this is a reference to Woodson. One of the few times the Steelers screwed up by letting someone get away. I believe, I think Dan Rooney said that, the late Dan Rooney. But Tom Donahoe, who was basically the general manager, he was a director of player personnel, but he was effectively their general manager in those days. He said, but I think there was talk of bringing him back at one point. And he said, this isn't a revolving door. Donahoe and Bill Coward had a big blowout, so I guess he didn't maybe have the greatest relationship in the world with the franchise. Who knows? But of course, he could have been speaking for the owners too. But Dan Rooney did say it was one of his biggest regrets. And but back in those days, in the '90s, back when free agency first started, and the Steelers were still at Three Rivers, and they didn't have the revenue that they would later get at Heinz Field with the luxury suites and everything. They just didn't sign a lot of free agents. They just, or their own especially. I mean, they let so many guys walk. I mean, guys like Chad Brown and Yancey Thigpen and John Jackson. I can go on and on and on. They almost let Bettis go. I mean, it was a big deal that they actually signed him. They signed him to an extension after they brought him here in '96. They traded for him. That was a big deal for them to keep the bus. Could you imagine if they would have just let him walk and just say, okay, we're gonna bring in another running back, draft a guy. I mean, can you imagine how different Super Bowl 40 would have been that story? I mean, it would have. I mean, here's one of the most beloved players in the history of the franchise, and he almost walked. They didn't sign free agents back then. They didn't. Now they sign pretty much everybody. It's funny. I mean, and I think a lot of that is because they had such a big time era in the 2000s with the championship games and the Super Bowls. So I think they just decided we have a great team here. We're gonna try to keep it together as long as we can. So they changed their philosophy a bit. So, but back then they didn't sign their guys. They just didn't. All right, this is a really fun show, and I'm glad everybody participated. Here's one from Steelers Pittsburgh. Will they? One final question: will they televise the national anthem? I get the feeling this year they will, because it's a compelling topic. It's just whether you're offended by it or you agree with it, you have to admit it's a compelling topic, right? For the last couple of years, I think they decided not to televise it because it was such a divisive thing and people were offended and they didn't want to lose ratings. But now that they've come out and say, look, we feel differently about this subject, I think they're going to televise it because I think they want to show that they want to put their money where their mouth is. So it'll be interesting to see I mean, I know the reaction is going to be volatile. There's no way around it. But yeah, I think they are going to televise it, at least in the beginning. At least at the beginning of the year. There's no way around that. But on that note, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for all your questions and for the super chat donations. That's always welcome, and you guys are awesome. And I had a lot of fun today. These were controversial topics, at least a couple of them were, but it was fun. I think it's okay to talk about these things. I think personally, it's no big deal. It's just my opinion, your opinion. I have friends that are the polar opposite of me when it comes to my views on life and my worldviews, and we get along just swimmingly. It's no big deal. But you get on social media and everybody hates each other. It shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it is. But anyway, thank you for participating. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Same time, same channel, and I'll talk to you on Monday with Brian when we do Steelers Q&A at 5, and then we follow that with the retro show. And you guys are awesome. Have a great weekend.